She moved quietly through the command center, making notes in a small tablet. No one questioned her presence until Colonel Hayes noticed. His reaction was immediate. Who authorized a civilian in my operations center? Without waiting for an answer, he ordered her removed. No one defended her as security escorted her away, whispers following her exit. 90 minutes later, as Operation Iron Shield began, the entire defense grid crashed. Access codes failed. Foreign observers exchanged worried glances. With the colonel's authority crumbling, the blast doors opened. She returned. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories about hidden strength and unrecognized heroes, please consider subscribing to our channel for more. Fort Blackstone military installation cut through the Montana landscape like a steel fortress. Its massive underground complex housing over 3,000 personnel, all preparing for Operation Iron Shield, a classified cyber defense exercise years in the planning. In the Central Command Center, Colonel Marcus Hayes surveyed his domain with the confidence of a man who had earned every ribbon on his chest. The morning fluorescent lights illuminated banks of computer screens and the focused expressions of his cyber warfare specialists. Elena Rodriguez stood quietly by the network monitoring station, her dark hair pulled into a simple ponytail. Her gray business suit neither expensive nor cheap, designed precisely to draw no attention. She studied the displays with practiced eyes, occasionally making notes on a small black tablet, though she moved with purpose. She seemed to exist just outside everyone's field of vision, a talent she had perfected over decades. Major Catherine Wells passed by, barely glancing at her as she delivered reports to the colonel. 3 cyber analysts huddled nearby, discussing encryption protocols, their eyes sliding past Elena as if she were part of the equipment. She preferred it this way. Invisibility was a form of armor she had cultivated with care. When Colonel Hayes finally noticed her, his reaction was immediate, cutting through the ambient hum of computers like a blade. Who authorized a civilian in my operations center during pre-exercise procedures? His voice carried across the command center, silencing conversations. All eyes turned to the woman, who seemed to have appeared from nowhere. No one answered. No one claimed responsibility for her presence. Elena felt the weight of scrutiny settle on her shoulders, but didn't flinch. She'd experienced far worse than momentary discomfort. Major Wells approached the colonel, lowering her voice slightly. "Sir, security protocols indicate all civilian observers should be in the designated viewing area." Elena said nothing, simply closing her tablet. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, took in every reaction in the command center. She noted who seemed confused, who appeared suspicious, and most importantly, who showed recognition. There weren't many in the latter category, just as it should be. "Security, escort this woman to the visitor quarters," Colonel Hayes ordered. "She has no business here." Captain Alex Morrison stepped forward, professional but firm. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with me." From nearby, Lieutenant Brad Carson smirked. "Someone's inspection team took a wrong turn," he murmured, just loud enough for nearby officers to hear. Several junior officers suppressed smiles. As Elena was escorted toward the exit, she remained composed, her face betraying nothing. Behind her, the whispers began rippling to the command center personnel like a current through shallow water. Probably some contractor's assistant. Defense Department pencil pusher. How'd she even get clearance to enter the facility? Major Sarah Kim, the installation's executive officer, watched her departure with an unreadable expression. Unlike the others, she said nothing, her eyes following Elena until the blast door slid closed. She then returned to her duties, checking her watch with particular attention. Elena allowed herself to be led through the installation's maze-like corridors. The security officer kept a respectful distance, but made it clear she wasn't to deviate from their path. They passed through 3 security checkpoints, each requiring the officer to explain his unusual escort duty. Civilian found in command center. Colonel's orders to escort to visitor quarters. At the 3rd checkpoint, an older master sergeant with weathered features looked up from his station. His eyes met Elena's for a brief moment, his expression giving away nothing. "Understood. Proceed." Elena was finally deposited in a small but comfortable room designated for visiting officials. The security officer hesitated at the door. "Ma'am, you're requested to remain here until further notice. If you need anything, use the internal comm system." He seemed unsure how to address her, unable to determine her status or importance. "Thank you, Captain," Elena replied, her voice carrying a quiet authority that made him stand slightly straighter. "That will be all." Once alone, Elena checked her watch. The exercise would begin in approximately 90 minutes. She sat at the small desk and reopened her tablet, reviewing her observations from the command center. Everything was proceeding according to plan, including her dismissal. She had expected nothing less from Colonel Hayes, whose reputation for strict adherence to protocol was well documented. She opened a secure application and began entering a sequence of numbers and letters, her typing precise and measured. When she finished, she encrypted the file and stored it in a hidden partition. Then she waited. Precisely 87 minutes later, a soft knock came at her door. The weathered master sergeant stood outside, his posture suggesting casual business. "Director, it's time," he said simply when she opened the door. Elena nodded and followed him into the corridor. They moved unhurriedly but with purpose, bypassing the main thoroughfares in favor of service passageways. Few personnel passed them, and those who did merely nodded at the sergeant without questioning his companion. "Status," Elena asked as they approached the command center. "Phase 1 complete. System lockdown initiating in approximately 3 minutes." "Good," she replied. "And our observer?" "In position." On the command center floor, the atmosphere had transformed in Elena's absence. Representatives from 4 allied nations stood in the observation area, their uniforms crisp and formal. General Patricia Martinez from Cyber Command had arrived, her presence underscoring the importance of the exercise. Digital displays showed the positions of 12 installations participating in the coordinated exercise, spread across multiple continents. "Operation Iron Shield commencing in 3 minutes," announced Lieutenant Sarah Park from Communications, her voice clear and professional. "All stations report ready status." Colonel Hayes stood at the command position, back straight, voice clear, all traces of the earlier disruption gone from his demeanor. "Begin authentication sequence." Lieutenant Park's fingers flew across her console. "Authentication protocols initiated, sir." She paused, frowning slightly. "Sir, authentication protocols are cycling but not accepting command codes." The first hint of tension appeared in the room. Captain Jennifer Torres joined her at the station, her movements quick but controlled as she assessed the situation. "Redundancy systems also failing to respond, Colonel," she reported after a moment, confusion evident in her voice. Colonel Hayes' confidence didn't waver. "Override with emergency protocol Delta 9. The computer's response was immediate, the synthetic voice emanating clearly through the command center speakers. "Access denied. Insufficient authorization." The first flicker of concern crossed Hayes' face. "Try again." Park repeated the procedure, her movements more deliberate this time. "Access denied. Insufficient authorization." General Martinez stepped forward, her expression carefully neutral but her eyes sharp. "Colonel, if your installation cannot execute basic defense protocols during a simulation, I have serious concerns about operational readiness." The foreign observers exchanged glances. The British attaché whispered something to his colleague, who nodded gravely. The impression they were receiving was exactly what Elena had anticipated. American cyber defense failing. At a crucial moment, Hayes' face reddened slightly. "Try my personal override authorization." Park input the colonel's code, her fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. The system processed for 3 seconds, the display showing a rotating authentication symbol. "Access denied. System lockdown initiated." The old master sergeant, who had slipped into command center during the growing confusion, quietly made his exit, unnoticed by most in the mounting tension. Major Kim, however, tracked his departure with her eyes before reaching into her pocket to withdraw a sealed envelope. She studied it with a troubled expression, checking the timestamp printed on its surface. On the main display, an unusual symbol briefly flashed before disappearing, a circular emblem with a stylized shield at its center. Only someone watching for it would have noticed. "This is beyond embarrassing, Colonel," General Martinez said quietly. "It's a strategic failure." Colonel Hayes' composure finally broke. "I want every systems analyst in this facility here now. Someone get strategic command on the line." The computer responded before anyone could move. Communications restricted. Authority verification required. The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. They were cut off, isolated, and in front of international observers, they had lost control of their own systems. "What the hell is happening?" Colonel Hayes demanded, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Sir," Captain Torres reported, "all automated defense systems are in standby mode. Manual overrides are not responding." The British attaché leaned toward his American counterpart. "Perhaps this demonstration was premature," he suggested, his tone carefully diplomatic, but the criticism clear. Colonel Hayes turned to his communications officer. "Use the emergency channel. Direct line to Cyber Command." "Sir, all external communications are locked down." Lieutenant Park responded, frustration evident in her voice. "The system is requiring an authority verification we don't have." "Override it," Hayes ordered. "I cannot, sir. The system is not recognizing any of our authorization codes." General Martinez stepped closer to Hayes, lowering her voice. "Colonel, if this is a system failure, it needs to be resolved immediately. If it's something else." She left the implication hanging. "It's not a security breach," Hayes insisted. "This system was vetted by NSA last month." As the tension mounted, Major Kim finally opened the sealed envelope she had been holding. Scanning its contents quickly, her expression shifted from concern to understanding. She checked her watch one final time and moved toward the colonel. "Sir," she said quietly, "I believe help is already on the way." As if on cue, the blast door slid open. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. All eyes turned to see who had arrived. Elena Rodriguez walked calmly into the command center, the old master sergeant now at her side. Her posture had changed subtly, a shift from unobtrusive to commanding. Though nothing in her appearance had altered, it was as if she had simply allowed a hidden aspect of herself to become visible. Colonel Hayes' face darkened. "I ordered you confined to visitor quarters. Security, remove this woman immediately." Without acknowledging the colonel, Elena walked directly toward the main console. Her movements were unhurried but purposeful, as if she had performed this exact sequence countless times before. Two security officers moved to intercept her, hands moving instinctively toward their sidearms. Major Kim raised her hand. "Let her pass," she said quietly, her voice carrying unexpected authority. The security officers hesitated, looking between Kim and Colonel Hayes for clarification. In that moment of uncertainty, Elena continued forward. General Martinez, watching from nearby, narrowed her eyes. Her expression shifted from confusion to something else, recognition dawning slowly across her features. She took a half step forward, then deliberately stepped back, choosing to observe rather than intervene. "What is the meaning of this?" Colonel Hayes demanded, but the question lacked his earlier conviction. Something in Elena's demeanor had changed the dynamic in the command center. Elena reached the lockdown console. With practiced efficiency, she entered a 16-digit code from memory, her fingers moving across the keypad in a precise rhythm. The system processed for a moment, lights blinking in rapid sequence across the display. "Sovereign override accepted," announced the computer, its synthetic voice somehow carrying a note of deference that had been absent before. "Guardian protocol authenticated. Welcome, Director Rodriguez." The main screen displayed a classification that made several officers inhale sharply. "Guardian 7 Authority active." Below it appeared security clearance level that most in the room had never seen before, designated by a simple black hexagon with a single white eye at its center. Colonel Hayes' face drained of color as understanding struck him. His eyes darted from Elena to General Martinez, who now wore a grim expression. The colonel opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, reassessing everything he thought he knew about command structure. Major Kim approached Elena, producing the small black tablet she had been carrying earlier. She handed it to her with a respectful nod. The preliminary analysis, Director, as you requested. The foreign observers straightened, their body language transforming from skeptical to alert respect. The British attaché, who had been critical moments before, now watched with undisguised interest, his previous dismissiveness replaced by careful attention. Lieutenant Carson, who had mocked her earlier, stared open-mouthed. His complexion had paled considerably as the implications of his earlier behavior sank in. General Martinez moved to Colonel Hayes' side. "You've never met a Guardian Director before?" she asked quietly. "They're embedded in all strategic installations. Ultimate override authority, answerable only to the President and the Joint Chiefs." Colonel Hayes' voice was barely audible. "Why wasn't I informed?" "That's the point, Colonel," General Martinez replied. "If you knew, so might others." Elena's fingers moved across the console with practiced precision. Status indicators changed from red to green across the board. Systems came back online one by one, each activating with a soft chime of confirmation. The command center crew watched in stunned silence as she navigated security protocols that had stymied their best efforts. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but carried an unmistakable authority. The room fell completely silent to hear her words. "The exercise was compromised," she said. "Someone attempted to use it to access our defensive grid architecture." Her fingers tapped several more commands, bringing up a diagnostic screen that only she and Major Kim seemed able to interpret. "The breach has been isolated. You may proceed with the exercise, Colonel." For several seconds, Colonel Hayes seemed unable to respond. The power dynamic in his command center had shifted so dramatically that he appeared to be recalibrating his entire understanding of his authority. Finally, he straightened his uniform, composing himself with visible effort. "Director Rodriguez, I apologize for the misunderstanding earlier." Elena turned to face him fully. For the first time, she allowed the full weight of her experience and authority to show in her expression. "There was no misunderstanding, Colonel. Your security protocols function as they should. My role requires invisibility." The command center crew watched this exchange in stunned silence. The woman they had dismissed, even mocked, now commanded a level of authority that superseded everyone present, including Colonel Hayes. The revelation created an almost physical pressure in the room, a collective realization that they had been working alongside someone whose true purpose and power had been deliberately concealed from them. General Martinez cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should discuss the security implications in private, Director." Elena nodded. "A full briefing will be provided to those with appropriate clearance. For now, the exercise should continue." She turned to Lieutenant Park. "Communications are restored. Inform all installations that will resume in 5 minutes." "Yes, Director," Park responded, the title coming naturally despite never having used it before. Elena turned back to the central console, making a few final adjustments. As she worked, Colonel Hayes moved her aside, his voice lowered for privacy. "How long have you been embedded in my command?" he asked. "That's not relevant to the current situation, Colonel," she replied without looking up. "What matters is identifying how the intrusion attempt originated." Colonel Hayes processed this deflection, understanding it as the gentle rebuke it was. "Of course. How can my team assist?" "By continuing the exercise as planned. Deviations from protocol will only alert the responsible parties." She finished her work and straightened up. Major Kim has been briefed on additional security measures. As Elena turned to leave, having completed her task without fanfare, Major Kim called out, "Attention on deck." The entire command center crew, including Colonel Hayes after a moment's hesitation, stood at attention. The foreign military attaches, recognizing what was happening, also rose in respect. It was a gesture typically reserved for the highest-ranking officers or civilian leadership, a spontaneous acknowledgement of authority that transcended formal rank. Elena paused, visibly uncomfortable with the display. She acknowledged the gesture with a slight nod, but said nothing more. As she exited, the master sergeant fell in step behind her, his posture revealing that he had been her security detail all along. The blast doors closed behind them, leaving a transformed atmosphere in their wake. After she left, the command center remained silent for several seconds, each person processing what they had witnessed. It was General Martinez who finally broke the silence. "I've encountered Guardian Program personnel twice in my 25-year career," she said. "Both times under circumstances I'm still not permitted to discuss. Consider yourselves privileged to have seen one in action." Colonel Hayes nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Resume exercise preparations," he finally said, his voice different now, more measured, "and schedule a full security briefing for senior staff at 1900 hours." As the command center returned to its normal operations, the experience lingered like a vivid afterimage. The revelation of Elena Rodriguez's true identity had shattered assumptions and reframed their understanding of authority. For many present, it was a humbling reminder that true power often resided where they least expected it. Major Kim returned to her station, fielding curious glances from her colleagues with professional detachment. She had known, or at least suspected, something the others hadn't. That knowledge had placed her in a unique position during the crisis, and now raised questions about her own role in the command structure. Lieutenant Park reestablished communications with the network, her movements more focused than before. All installations reporting ready status. "Operation Iron Shield can resume on your command, Colonel." Colonel Hayes took his position at the center of the command center. "Proceed with the exercise." His voice carried its usual authority, but those who knew him well could detect a subtle difference. The encounter had changed something fundamental in his understanding of his command. As the drill progressed, the events of the past hour receded into the background of immediate operational concerns. But in quiet moments, each officer found their thoughts returning to the woman who had walked into their command center, transformed from invisible to commanding in a matter of moments. In the officers' mess later that afternoon, whispered conversations attempted to piece together the mystery. Who was she really? How long had she been on base? What was the Guardian program? The speculation filled gaps in knowledge with imagination, creating a mythology around Elena Rodriguez that would only grow with time. Lieutenant Carson sat silently during these discussions, his earlier mockery weighing heavily on him. He had dismissed someone with authority that dwarfed anything he had encountered in his young career. The lesson was one he wouldn't soon forget. As evening approached, Colonel Hayes reviewed the day's exercise results in his private office. The data showed a successful completion of all objectives, with performance metrics exceeding expectations across multiple categories. By any standard measure, Operation Iron Shield had been a success. Yet he found himself distracted, his thoughts returning repeatedly to the moment Elena Rodriguez had entered her override code, the way the system had responded to her, the immediate recognition of her authority, the classification level he had never seen before. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called. Major Kim stepped inside, carrying a sealed folder marked with security classifications. "The briefing materials for this evening, sir." Colonel Hayes accepted the folder. "You knew about her." It wasn't a question, but Kim answered anyway. "Not exactly, sir. I was informed that there was a Guardian program asset on base approximately 18 months ago. I was given protocols to follow in the event of certain contingencies. Today was the first time those protocols were activated. And you never thought to inform me? My orders were explicit, Colonel. Knowledge containment was paramount." Colonel Hayes nodded slowly. "I understand. Thank you, Major." After Kim left, Hayes opened the folder and began to read. The documents contained information on the security breach that had been attempted during the exercise, technical details about how the intrusion had been detected and blocked, and recommendations for preventing similar vulnerabilities in the future. What the folder did not contain was any information about Elena Rodriguez or the Guardian program. That, Colonel Hayes realized, was a mystery that would remain largely unsolved, at least for him. It was both frustrating and strangely reassuring, knowing there were safeguards in place that even he wasn't aware of. As he closed the folder, he made a mental note to pay more attention to the unassuming people in his command, the ones who moved quietly through the installation's daily life, the ones who watched and listened more than they spoke, the invisible ones who might, like Elena Rodriguez, be far more than they appeared. The day's exercise had concluded successfully. Personnel were securing their stations, the organized routine of a military installation winding down for the evening. The digital displays showed green across all systems, confirming that Operation Iron Shield had met all its objectives. Elena Rodriguez stood alone in the observation deck overlooking the main floor, her simple gray suit making her nearly invisible against the utilitarian background. She had exchanged her tablet for a standard clipboard, another small concession to maintaining her cover. Her presence had been acknowledged with curious glances from the technical staff, but no one approached her. Word had spread quickly throughout the installation about the day's events. She watched the personnel operations with professional interest, occasionally making notes on her clipboard, though her focus appeared beyond the technical aspects of the shutdown procedures. She was acutely aware of the figure approaching from behind. Colonel Hayes stepped up beside her, his uniform still crisp despite the long day. For a long moment, both watched the operations in silence, the hum of cooling computers making conversation easy. "How long have you been on my base?" he finally asked. 2 years, Colonel." Hayes turned to study her profile, unable to mask his surprise. 2 years, he repeated, the weight of this revelation hanging between them. "I've seen you before, in the commissary, the library." "Yes, I thought you were part of the civilian contractor staff." A small smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. That was the intention. Colonel Hayes looked back toward the main floor, where technicians were performing final system checks. "All this time," he said, his voice thoughtful rather than accusatory, "you've been evaluating my command." "No," Elena corrected gently. "I've been protecting it." "From what?" She considered her response carefully. Fort Blackstone represents one of the most sophisticated cyber defense systems ever deployed. There are entities, both foreign and domestic, who would exploit any vulnerability they could find. "And today?" "A test," she said simply, one designed to determine whether certain safeguards were functioning correctly. Colonel Hayes processed this. Was it successful? Largely. The primary systems responded as expected. There are some concerns about the encryption protocols that will need to be addressed. A technician passed by them, nodding respectfully before continuing with his duties. The word about Elena's true identity had clearly spread throughout the installation. When they could speak privately again, Hayes asked a question that had been troubling him since the morning. "Why wasn't I informed of your presence, of your authority?" "Someone needs to be the last line of defense," Elena said simply. "Someone without a uniform, without rank or recognition. Someone whose authority remains invisible until the moment it's needed most." The Guardian program. Hayes said, "I've heard rumors, never confirmed." "Best that it stay that way, Colonel." He studied her for a moment, seeing her truly for the first time. Not just the unassuming appearance she cultivated, but the steel beneath it, the quiet competence that had allowed her to blend seamlessly into his command for years while maintaining vigilance he hadn't even been aware of. "Thank you for your service, Director." She gave a small, genuine smile, the first full one he'd seen. "Just doing my job like everyone else on this base." As they turned to walk back inside, the technical staff paused in their work, standing respectfully as she passed. No words were exchanged, but the respect was palpable. News traveled quickly on a military installation, and by now most of the personnel had heard some version of what had transpired in the command center. The story had undoubtedly grown in the telling, but the essential truth remained. The unremarkable woman walking past them carried authority few of them would ever comprehend. Elena acknowledged their respect with simple nods, maintaining the same unassuming demeanor she had cultivated for years. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction at finally being recognized. If anything, she seemed slightly uncomfortable with the attention, preferring the shadows to the spotlight. As they reached the entrance to the administrative wing, Colonel Hayes paused. "Will you be staying on base after the exercise evaluation is complete?" "My assignment here is complete," Elena replied. "A replacement will be designated. Will I be informed who it is?" She smiled slightly. "What do you think, Colonel?" Hayes nodded, understanding. "Of course not." He hesitated. "Is there anything I should know before you depart?" "Your command is solid," she said. "Your personnel are well trained. your security protocols are effective, and your leadership is respected. Those are the things that matter. And the security breach attempt is being tracked. You'll be briefed on any actionable intelligence. They enter the installation's interior. The relative quiet, a stark contrast to the operational hum of the command center. As they walk to the corridors, personnel snap to respectful attention, their eyes following Elena with newfound awareness. She acknowledged them briefly, but didn't slow her pace. The Guardian program, Hayes said as they walked. "How many of you are there?" "Enough," she replied. "Distributed across critical infrastructure, military installations, government facilities. All of you operating without recognition. Recognition would defeat the purpose, Colonel. Our effectiveness depends on anonymity." They reached a junction where their paths would diverge. Hayes to his office for final reports, Elena to wherever her duties took her. They paused, an unspoken acknowledgement that this conversation represented a unique moment neither had anticipated when the day began. "I'm sorry about this morning," Hayes said. "Had I known—" "You acted exactly as you should have, Colonel," Elena interrupted gently. "Security protocols exist for a reason. You identified an unauthorized presence and responded appropriately. That's not something to apologize for. It's something to take pride in." Hayes considered this. "Still, I regret the way it was handled. This isn't the first time I've been escorted from a restricted area, Colonel, and it likely won't be the last. It's part of maintaining the cover." A junior officer approached, hesitated upon seeing them together, then continued with determined professionalism. "Excuse me, Colonel. Major Kim requests your presence in the briefing room. The final exercise reports are ready for your review." "Thank you, Lieutenant. Tell her I'll be there shortly." The officer acknowledged the instruction and departed, casting one curious glance back at Elena before disappearing around a corner. "Duty calls," Hayes said. Elena nodded. "It always does. Will I see you again before you depart?" "Unlikely. I prefer to exit as I arrived, without ceremony." "Then I suppose this is goodbye, Director Rodriguez." She extended her hand, a surprisingly formal gesture from someone who had spent years avoiding notice. "It's been an honor serving at Fort Blackstone, Colonel." Hayes shook her hand, struck by the strange reversal of their morning encounter. "The honor has been ours, though we didn't know it." With a final nod, Elena turned and walked away, her posture already shifting subtly back to that of an unremarkable civilian contractor. Within 10 steps, she had transformed, becoming once again the kind of person eyes would pass over without registering. Colonel Hayes watched her go, marveling at the skill involved in such a deliberate diminishment of presence. Then he turned and headed for the briefing room, his thoughts already turning to the operational matters awaiting him. 2 days later, as Fort Blackstone returned to normal operations, Colonel Hayes realized he hadn't seen Elena Rodriguez since their conversation in the observation deck. He made discreet inquiries, learning that a civilian contractor matching her description had been processed for departure during the night shift, leaving via military transport on what was listed as priority reassignment. No further explanation was provided, and Hayes knew better than to push for one. She had done exactly as she said she would, departing without ceremony or acknowledgement. It was fitting, he supposed, for someone whose entire career appeared to be built around remaining unnoticed until the critical moment. During the post-exercise briefing with the senior staff, Hayes made no mention of Elena Rodriguez or the Guardian program. Instead, he focused on the operational successes of Operation Iron Shield, the technical lessons learned, and the preparations needed for their next major exercise. When Major Kim presented the security assessment, there was a single line referencing a system authentication anomaly that had been resolved through redundancy protocols. The deliberate understatement brought a small smile to Hayes' face, unnoticed by most in the room. As the briefing concluded and his officers filed out, Hayes found himself studying each face with new awareness. Which of his personnel might be the next Guardian operative? Would it be someone already on base, or a new arrival during their next rotation? Would he ever know for certain? The questions remained with him as he completed his duties, signing off on reports and preparing for the installation's return to standard operations. In quiet moments, his thoughts would return to the image of Elena Rodriguez, standing at the console, entering her override code with calm precision while chaos swirled around her. 3 months later, during a routine security inspection, while Fort Blackstone underwent a systems upgrade, Colonel Hayes noticed a new face among the technical contractors. A younger woman with unremarkable features and a quiet demeanor who seemed to blend into the background of every room she entered. The woman's eyes, however, held a watchful quality that Hayes now recognized. Their paths crossed briefly as Hayes made his rounds. The contractor nodded respectfully. "Colonel." Hayes returned the nod. "Carrying on," he said simply. "Always, sir," the woman replied. No further words were exchanged. None were needed. Hayes continued his inspection, allowing himself a small smile at the knowledge that the installation remained protected by guardians few would ever notice. In his quarterly report to Cyber Command, submitted the following week, Hayes included a seemingly innocuous sentence: "All operational security protocols functioning as designed." It was as close as he would ever come to acknowledging what he had learned about the invisible layers of protection surrounding his command. Life at the installation returned to its normal rhythms. Operations continued. Exercises were conducted. Missions were accomplished. But Colonel Hayes found himself paying more attention to the people at the periphery of any room he entered. The quiet ones, the watchers, the ones who moved through the world without leaving ripples. In the officers' mess one evening, he overheard some junior officers discussing the incident during Operation Iron Shield. The story was already taking on mythical qualities in its retelling. The woman who had walked into the command center and taken control had become, in their telling, a mysterious government agent with almost supernatural authority. Hayes didn't correct them. Let them believe what they would. The truth, he had come to understand, was both simpler and more profound. The most effective guardians were those who asked for no recognition, who carried their authority silently until the moment it was needed most. And perhaps that was the most important lesson he had learned through his encounter with Elena Rodriguez. True security didn't announce itself with uniforms and rank insignia. It moved quietly through the world, watching, waiting, protecting without being seen until a moment when someone needed to step forward and input the code that only they possessed. The greatest strength often belonged to those who never asked to be noticed, who served in silence, and who revealed their true power only when everything else had failed. Elena Rodriguez had embodied that principle perfectly. A guardian in the shadows, protecting those who would never know her name.